Masechus Yevamos Daf Kuf Chav Beis is the last daf in all of Masechus Yevamos. It continues the topic of when we're allowed to allow a woman to remarry based on the testimony that her husband had died. There are three Mishnayos on the daf. The first sugi before the first Mishnah is three stories of when an Oved Kechavim is trusted. The Mishnah discusses two halachos: what type of lighting is good to identify a person who died, and if you can trust a voice, which you don't know who it belonged to, that said that somebody had died. And then the next Mishnah will talk about the story which we've seen quoted earlier in Rabbi Akiva met Nehemiah Ish Beis Dli and his testimony about whether you can trust an Eid Echad. And the third Mishnah will be further on the same incident. The Gemara will comment along those halachas along the way. So let's begin. We've said the halacha of an Oved Kechavim is you can trust him as long as he doesn't know he's testifying for a halachic issue that allows a certain halacha to take place based on what he's saying. Even if he's testifying the person died so people know, but he doesn't understand the halacha that's behind it, then you can trust him. So the Gemara has three stories. First one is brought by Abba Yudin Ishsaid, he said it was a story with a Yisrael and Oved Kechavim were traveling on the road. The Oved Kechavim said, Chaval on that Jew that he died on the road and I buried him. We allowed his wife to get remarried based on that. We trusted him because, again, he wasn't saying a halachic testimony, just a Metzias testimony. Second story was about a group of people that were traveling to Antiochia. Oved Kechavim said, Chaval on those people that were traveling to Antiochia, and they died, and I buried them, and we allowed their wives to get remarried based on that. The third story was there was 60 people who were traveling to Beitar, the city that was under siege by the Romans, and a guy came and said, Chaval, those 60 people who were traveling to Beitar, and I buried them all, they died, and we allowed their wives to get remarried based on that testimony. Okay, now we get to the Mishnah. First Mishnah first discusses the lighting that's acceptable to be able to identify someone. It says you can use any type of lighting to identify, even candlelight, even moonlight. Next, what happens if you just had a voice and you don't know who the voice belonged to? So the Mishnah says you can allow a woman to get remarried based on a voice that you don't know whose it is. The Mishnah talks about a bas kol. Here does not mean a voice from Shemaim. It just means a voice that's not connected to a body, a disembodied voice. Not to say that it's something spiritual, but just we don't know who it is. The Mishnah actually brings a story. There was someone, seemed to be someone standing on a mountaintop, and he said, such and such person from such and such place has died. They went to see who was talking, couldn't find anybody there. So we don't know who said it, but we assume that it's somebody who's kosher to say Eidos, and therefore, or at least Eidos Isha, and therefore we allowed the person who he was referring to, we allowed that person's wife to get remarried. And there was another story that happened in Salmon by somebody who said, and he gave his name, Pliny ben Ish, Pliny, I've been bitten by a snake and I'm about to die. And they went and they found the body, but they couldn't recognize the body. The snake bite causes the person's face to get disfigured. They didn't know who he was. And based on what they heard the voice, they allowed his wife to remarry. Now, the Gemara begins. The Gemara, first of all, quotes a statement of Rabbi Bar Shmuel, who says that it's actually a machlokes between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, whether or not you're allowed to trust the voice. Beis Hillel says yes, Beis Shammai says no. So the Gemara says, what are you telling me? We already have the Mishnah that said that we know that the halacha is you're allowed to trust the voice. So you're telling me that Beis Hillel holds that way. All right? The Gemara says, no, you need to know this because if you ever find a brisa or a Mishnah that stam says you're not allowed to, you should know that that's Beis Shammai. Don't think that that's the halacha and start getting confused what the halacha is. Okay, next the Gemara says we had the story where the voice came from the mountaintop. They saw someone at the top of the mountain, couldn't tell who, they heard the voice. So the Gemara says maybe it was a shade. If it was a shade, you wouldn't be able to trust what he says. So the Gemara says, if he was in the name of Rav, they saw that he was shaped like a person. So the Gemara says shade can also be shaped like a person. So the Gemara said, well, they saw that whoever it was had a shadow. So the Gemara says the shadim can have a shadow. So the Gemara says no, it's talking about the shadow of the shadow. Shadow of the shadow is sometimes there are two shadows when the sun is low in the sky. There are two shadows cast, a larger shadow which is fainter and a smaller shadow which is stronger. So the faint shadow that a shade does not have. The Gemara quotes Rabbi Chanina who says that Yonasan the shade. The Rishonim explain that's either Yonasan who was a shade, it's the name of a shade, or Yonasan who was an expert in shadim. He told me that a shade does not have the lighter shadow, what we call the shadow of the shadow, and this person on the mountaintop had it, and therefore we knew he wasn't a shade. Now, this is only an issue because he was on a mountaintop. If it would be in a city, you don't have to be concerned for shadim who don't frequent the cities. All right, now the Gemara says maybe it was a tzara. Maybe it was one of the people that are not trusted to testify for Eidos Isha. So the Gemara says that Rabbi Yishmael says b'shas sakana, meaning at a time when a person is dying and we need to know who his wife is, otherwise she's going to be an aguna. We trust even though we don't know who the person is, we assume that it's not one of the 5 types of people who are not trusted. Here, you definitely have a situation like that because there's no other way of knowing who this person was referring to, what happened, and therefore we trust that it was not someone who was puzzle for Eidos Isha. Okay, now we get to the second Mishnah. And the Mishnah introduces the story of Rabbi Akiva, discussing the concept of whether or not you can trust an Eid Achad altogether for Eidos Isha. So the Mishnah says, Rabbi Akiva says, when I went down to Naharda to be Ma'aber the Shana, to sit on the court that was deciding whether or not to make it a leap year, I found Nechemia Ish Beis Dli. And Nechemia said to me, I heard that in Eretz Yisrael they do not allow a woman to get remarried based on the testimony of a single Eid. And Rabbi Akiva said that's correct. They do not allow it. The only one who allows it is Yehuda ben Vava. So Nehemiah said to him, look, I can't travel to Eretz Yisrael to tell them myself because there's too many soldiers walking around, but I'm telling you, I have a Kabbalah from Rabbi Gamliel HaZaken that we accept Eidos Isha from one single Eid. So Rabbi Akiva says, I got back to Eretz Yisrael and I went over to Rabbi Gamliel, not the same Rabbi Gamliel. This is Rabbi Gamliel, the grandson of Rabbi Gamliel HaZaken, who was the Nasi at the time, and I told him over what I had heard, and he was very happy. He said, we found someone who holds like Yehuda ben Bava, and based on that, he allowed a lot of things. He said he remembered a case that there was people who were killed in Tel Arza, and Rabbi Gamliel, based on this, there was only one Eid. Rabbi Gamliel, based on this, allowed their wives to get remarried based on the testimony of one Eid. And from here came the minig in Klal Yisrael that we allow testimony of one Eid. Now, what was the halacha before it became that? So, like we saw, it was everybody against Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. So the Mishnah quotes it. It says that we allow testimony of one Eid, from testimony from an Eved, from an Isha, from a Shivcha. Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Shua say you don't allow Eid Echad. And Rabbi Akiva says you don't allow Isha, you don't allow an Eved, you don't allow a Shivcha, and you don't allow relatives. So this is all the situation before the Minhagim here changed. And now the Gemara begins. The Gemara says, is it true that Rabbi Akiva held that way? Rabbi Akiva says you can't trust an Isha. It can't be because the Raisa Rosh ben Elazar brings the name of Rabbi Akiva that says that you can trust a woman to bring a get, to be a shliach, to bring a get from Medina Siyam, even though she has to testify that it was written and signed Lishma. She has to say b'fani nechtam. But she's trusted to be able to say that. How do you know that? Because there are 5 women who are not trusted in Eidos Isha. Now, although they're not trusted in Eidos Isha to allow a woman to remarry, they are trusted to bring a get from Medina Siyam. So certainly the woman herself, she's trusted to bring her get because she is trusted on Eidos Isha. So anyways, we see from here that there are only 5 women that are not trusted for Eidos Isha. All other women are. Contradiction to what Rabbi Akiva says in this Mishnah, that they're not trusted. The Gemara says no, that is talking before it became Hochzak. Our Mishnah was referring to before we established the minig. Your Bryce that you brought is talking about after the minig was established that we do trust Eidos Isha. All right, now we get to the next and the last Mishnah in the Masechta. The Mishnah continues the discussion between Rabbi Akiva and the other Chaverim about whether or not you trust people, for whether or not you trust an Eid Echad or an Isha to allow a woman to get remarried. So the Chacham said to Rabbi Akiva, there was a story with happened with a bunch of Bnei Levi, Levim, that were traveling to Tzayar, the city of Tamarim, the dates, and one of them got sick. And they brought him to an inn along the road, and they left him there to recover. And on the way back, they passed by the inn again, and they stopped and they said to the innkeeper, the Mishnah calls it Pundakis, the female innkeeper, where is our friend? And she said, he died and I buried him, and they allowed his wife to get remarried based on the testimony of this innkeeper. So the question was that this innkeeper was not a trustworthy individual. Her level of believability was low. So if they believed her, they should certainly allow a regular kosher woman to be trusted. So Rabbi Akiva said, she can be trusted the same as the innkeeper. The innkeeper was not trusted based on what she said. She was trusted only because she had evidence. She brought out the walking stick, the suitcase, and the Sefer Torah, which was owned by that person that they left there, the Chaver, the Levi. And since she had those things and he wasn't around, and according to some Rishonim, she also showed them a grave, therefore she had evidence, and that's why we trusted her. In a situation like that, So the Gemara says she was an Ovedes Kachavim, and she was talking Mesiach Lefi Tumah. She was a guy, and she was speaking, just testifying to what had happened without knowing that there was a halachic import to the issue. And she said, this is his walking stick, this is his suitcase, and this is his grave where I buried him. The Gemara says we have a brayso. Also, Abba, brother of Menyumi, Marchia, says that she was a pundakis of Edes Kachavim. She was Mesiach Lefitumai. This is the walking stick, this is the grave, and this is the suitcase. So the Gemara says, how could you say that she didn't understand that there was a halachic import? They went and asked her, Aye Chavarenu. They said, where's our friend? So the Gemara says, they first saw Mesiach Lefitumai, and then they asked. At first they came to show, they saw that she was crying. So they said, where's our friend? And then she said, the answer is he died and I buried him and all that. But she didn't know that they were interested in it beforehand and that there was a halachic issue involved. Okay, now the Gemara goes to the subject of when somebody is testifying, do you have to do drisha v'chakira? Do you have to investigate, cross-examine him to see if you can get him to contradict himself, to show that he's telling the truth? And you have to ask for information, what time, just to make sure that he has all that straight. So the Gemara brings a brisa. The brisa has a story of somebody who came to testify to the death of a woman's husband before Rabbi Tarfon. So Rabbi Tarfon said, tell me exactly what the story is. How do you know that this woman is allowed to remarry? So he said, him, her husband, and I were walking along the road, and we got chased by a troop of soldiers. And he grabbed a branch of an olive tree, and he broke it off, and he beat them back, chased them away. And I said to him, Aryeh, lion, yashkechacha, may you be strong. And he said to me, how do you know that my name is Aryeh? That's what people call me in my city. They call me Yochanan ben Rabbi Yonasan, the lion of Kfar Shichaya. And then a few days later, he got sick and he died. So this brisa says Rabbi Tarfon married off his wife just like that, allowed her to be free. So the Gemara says, you see, Rabbi Tarfon did not require Drisha Chakira, it didn't require investigation and questioning. But it shouldn't be correct, because we have another brisa that says otherwise, and that other brisa brings the same story, goes through the same thing. The difference is that in this story, the tree that he broke off the branch from was not a olive tree, it was a fig tree. Other than that, it's the same, except that at the end, he tried to get him to trip up in his words. And he said, Aryeh was his name, or Aryeh was the name of the city. The nickname is on Yochanan ben Yonasan, the lion of Kfar Shichaya, or is it Yochanan ben Yonasan of Kfar Shichaya, the lion? What's it on? So he was very straight. He got it clear. He said, no, he's named Yonasan. He didn't get confused, and therefore, he did cross-examine him, and he allowed him to get remarried. So do we insist on cross-examining or not? So that's a question. So the Gemara says not a problem, it's two brises, and it's a machlokas. And the authors of the brises are two sides of that machlokas, whether you allow it or not. So let's see the machlokas. We have it in a brisa. The brisa says, Rabbi Akiva, it's either Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon against the Tanakama, or Rabbi Akiva against Rabbi Tarfon. Do we do Drisha v'chakira on Edes Isha or not? Okay, that's the brisa. Now, what do they argue about? What is the crux of the machlokas? Crux of the machlokas is over Joshua said with Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Chanina said there are three types of Edes. There's Edes of Dine Mamanis, Dine Nefashos, and then there's Edes Isha. So Dine Mamanis and Dine Nefashos are different. Dine Nefashos, that's about capital punishment. It says there clearly you do Drisha v'chakira. It says V'darasha v'chakarta heitev. V'darasha v'chakarta v'sha'alta heitev. It says that specifically about a case of Misa. Now we link that to Dini Mamanis because it says Mishbadach Lachem. There should be a unified justice system for all of you. Now that teaches that both of them have to have Drisha v'chakira. However, the Rabbanon took away Drisha v'chakira from Dini Mamanis. They said if you're going to insist on Drisha v'chakira every time you want to see who owes money to whom, people aren't going to lend money to anybody because they're going to be afraid that their witnesses will be tripped up, and therefore they're going to lose their ability to claim. So Mirabanan, we allow to accept Edim without Drisha v'chakira on Mamanis. That's monetary issues. Question is, where does testifying about a woman's husband, where does that fit in? On the one hand, it's Dine Mamanis because she's going to get her ksuba based on this. On the other hand, it's Dine Nefashos because if she remarries and her original husband comes back, comes back, she just violated an Isser which carries Misa. So therefore, she's not going to get Misa because it was B'shogeg and she was an Ones, but it's certainly considered to be a very severe thing. So do you count it therefore as Dinei Fashus or as Dinei Mamadis? And that's the Machlokas. According to the one who says you do Jewish Chakiri, you count it as Dinei Nefashis. According to the one who says that you don't do Jewish Chakiri, you count it as Dinei Mamadis. The Masechta ends off by saying the Chachamim with their Takanas and everything that they did here allowed peace in the world, allowed women to get remarried, and the husbands not to be roaming around without a wife. And that's learned from the pasuk that says V'chol bonayich limudei Hashem rav shalom bonayich, where it doesn't quote it, but in other mesachtas it does. Alterki bonayich ela bonayich, and based on this we learn Talmidei Chachamim marbim shalom ba'olam. The four mesachtas that end off with this are Rosh Tevos bonayich, brachos, nazir, yevamos, and krisis. Hadron alach yishubasa sikol mesachas yevamos, hadron alach mesachas yevamos v'hadrach alon. Da'aton alach mesachas yevamos v'da'atoch alon. Leinis n'shem milach mesachas yevamos v'leisis n'shem minon leibal madein leibal madasei. Hadron alach mesachas yevamos v'hadrach alon. Da'aton alach mesachas yevamos v'da'atoch alon. Leinis n'shem milach mesachas yevamos v'leisis n'shem minon leibal madein leibal madasei. Hadron alach mesachas yevamos v'hadrach alon. Da'aton alach mesachas yevamos v'da'atoch alon. Leinis n'shem milach mesachas yevamos v'leisis n'shem minon leibal madein leibal